The laughter in the street turned cruel the moment the giant woman stepped onto the platform. Men pointed. Some howled like wolves. Others spat in the dirt as if the sight of her offended them. She stood taller than any woman most of them had ever seen. Broad shoulders, rope-bound wrists, and a rough grain sack pulled over her head. "Who'd buy that monster?" someone shouted. The crowd roared with laughter. At the edge of the street, a mountain man watched quietly. Silas Boone had come down from the peaks only to trade furs before winter closed the passes. He had no interest in bride auctions or the desperate souls who came west hoping to marry strangers. But something about the woman on that platform stopped him cold. She did not cry like the others. She did not beg. She simply stood there still as a pine tree in a storm. The auctioneer wiped sweat from his brow and forced a grin. "Gentlemen," he called, trying to sound cheerful. "This last bride may not be delicate, but she's strong. Strong as two men, I'd wager. She can work land, break horses, lift wagons if needed." A bottle flew from the crowd and shattered near her boots. She did not flinch. Silas studied her posture carefully. Even with a sack over her head, dignity clung to her like armor. He had seen that stance before. In wounded animals cornered by hunters. The auctioneer cleared his throat again. "Let's begin the bidding at $5. Silence. $3? A drunk miner laughed. "I wouldn't take her if you paid me." More laughter rolled through the street. The auctioneer's voice grew desperate. $1, anyone? Silas felt something tighten inside his chest. He had spent 40 winters in the mountains. He knew cruelty when he saw it, and he had never liked cages. "I'll give $2. His voice cut through the crowd like an axe through dry wood. The laughter died instantly. Every head turned. Silas Boone stepped forward slowly, boots heavy on the dirt road. He was a large man himself, broad as an oak trunk, gray beard hanging to his chest, eyes the color of winter clouds. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "That's Boone, the mountain hermit. He's finally lost his mind." The auctioneer practically sighed with relief. $2 from Mr. Boone. Do I hear 3? No one spoke. Sold. The gavel struck the platform. Silas climbed the wooden steps. The giant woman turned toward him. Even through the sack, he felt her eyes. Without saying a word, he pulled out his knife. Gasps rippled through the crowd, but instead of threatening her, he sliced the rope binding her wrists. The woman rubbed her hands slowly. Then she spoke. "You bought me like livestock," she said through the sack. "What makes you different from them?" Silas looked out at the disappointed crowd. "I didn't buy you," he said quietly. "I bought your freedom." The street fell silent, and somewhere deep inside that grain sack, for the first time all day, the giant woman stopped standing alone. The crowd did not know how to react. They had expected shouting, maybe a fight. Perhaps the giant woman would attack the mountain man and give them a spectacle worth remembering. Instead, they watched in awkward silence. Silas Boone simply stepped down from the platform and gestured toward the road. "If you want to leave," he said calmly, "you're free to walk away." The tall woman stood still for a moment. The grain sack still covered her face. "You expect me to believe that?" she asked. Silas shrugged. "Believe whatever you want." He began walking toward the edge of town, where his wagon waited beside the hitching rail. After a few seconds, heavy footsteps followed behind him. The murmurs began immediately. "Look at that. She's actually going with him. Boone's bringing home a giant wife." Laughter followed them down the street, but Silas ignored it. He had spent 20 years living far above the reach of town gossip. Words meant little to a man who had shared winters with wolves. At the wagon, 2 large draft horses lifted their heads. Silas patted the nearest one. "Easy, Duke." The giant woman climbed into the back of the wagon without help, settling among sacks of flour and dried beans. Her movements surprised him. For someone so large, she moved with quiet control, almost graceful. Silas climbed onto the driver's seat and took the reins. "You can take the sack off whenever you're ready," he said without turning around. Silence stretched behind him. Finally, her voice came again. "They said my face is cursed." Silas flicked the reins lightly. The wagon began rolling down the dirt road at a bitter creek. "I've survived 60 winters in the Rockies," he replied. "Fought grizzlies, avalanches, and 2 wars." He glanced back briefly. "I figure I can survive a face." The woman shifted slightly. "Why?" she asked after a moment. Why what? Why buy me? Silas considered the question as the town shrank behind them. You ever see a wounded elk cornered by hunters? He asked. Yes. They stand tall, he said, even when they know they're losing. He nodded toward her. That's how you stood on that platform. The wagon creaked along the road. The mountains loomed ahead, purple and white under the afternoon sun. You respected that? She asked quietly. Silas nodded. I respect anything that refuses to break. The woman was silent for a long time. Then she spoke again. My name is Eliza. Silas tipped his hat slightly. Silas Boone. They rode in silence as the prairie gave way to rising foothills. Finally she asked one more question. You're really taking me into those mountains. 15 miles up, he said. Cold, lonely, dangerous. Eliza leaned back against a sack of grain. For the first time there was something different in her voice. Something lighter. Sounds better than anywhere I've been. Silas said nothing. But as the road narrowed into a thin trail climbing toward the wilderness, he realized something unexpected. For the first time in 22 years, he was not traveling alone. The trail into the mountains grew rough as evening approached. Wagon wheels bumped over rocks and tree roots while tall pines closed around them like silent guards. The air turned colder with every mile they climbed. Behind him, Silas could feel Eliza watching everything. The trees, the distant cry of an eagle, the deep quiet that only existed far from towns and people. Few newcomers handled that silence well, but she didn't seem afraid of it. At last the cabin appeared through the trees. Old logs, darkened by weather, stood against the mountainside, smoke drifting lazily from a stone chimney. A small barn rested nearby beside a clear spring bubbling from the rocks. Silas pulled the horses to a stop. Home, he said simply. Eliza climbed down from the wagon slowly. The grain sack still covered her head. For a long moment she stood perfectly still. Silas realized she was listening. To the wind through the trees, to the water running over stones, to the deep, steady quiet of the wilderness. It's peaceful, she said softly. That bother you? Silas asked. No. She tilted her head slightly. It's the first peaceful place I've stood in years. Silas nodded once and began unhitching the horses. There's a small room inside, he said. Bed, stove, window facing the mountains. It's yours if you want it. And you? I've got my own corner. She seemed to consider that. Then she reached slowly toward the knot at her neck. The one holding the sack in place. Silas turned back toward the horses. Take your time, he said quietly, or don't. Makes no difference to me. Behind him he heard the rustle of rough cloth. The knot loosened, burlap slid across skin. Then silence. Something in that silence made him turn, and when he did, his breath stopped. Eliza was not ugly. That was the first shock. She wasn't delicate like the women in town with soft hands and powdered cheeks. Her face was strong and sharp, built with high cheekbones and a jaw set with stubborn pride. A pale scar ran from her temple down across her cheek to her jaw. It caught the evening light like a silver thread. Her eyes were gray-green, deep and steady like mountain lakes in winter, and her dark hair fell in thick waves around her shoulders, tangled from months of hardship. But it wasn't the scar that held Silas frozen. It was the expression on her face. Defiant, tired, and somehow still proud. She crossed her arms slightly. Now you see why they kept it covered. Silas said nothing. I'm not something a man wants to wake up beside, she continued bitterly. Silas finally spoke. You look like someone who survived. She blinked. In my experience, he added calmly, that's worth more than pretty. For a long moment she simply stared at him. Then she asked quietly, You're really not afraid of me? Silas rolled up his sleeve. Long claw scars from an old grizzly attack stretched across his arm. Life leaves marks on everyone, he said. Eliza studied the scars. Then she laughed softly. A harsh sound. But the first real laugh he had heard from her. Maybe the first in a very long time. The sun disappeared behind the mountains as they unloaded the wagon. Cold shadows stretched across the clearing while evening settled into the forest. Silas carried sacks of flour into the cabin while Eliza lifted heavier crates as if they weighed nothing. He noticed the way she worked. Every movement careful. Efficient, no wasted effort. She handled a 100-pound sack the same way a ranch wife might lift a basket of apples. Been doing hard work a long time, Silas said quietly. Eliza gave a small shrug. Hard work was the only work anyone would give me. When the wagon was empty, they stepped inside the cabin. The room was simple. A stone fireplace burned warmly in the center. Rough wooden shelves held jars of beans and dried meat. A heavy table stood beside the fire with 2 chairs carved by hand. Eliza looked around slowly. "This place," she said. Silas waited. "It feels safe." He nodded toward a small door in the corner. "Your room's through there." She stepped inside and examined the space. A narrow bed, a small iron stove, one window facing the snow-capped peaks. Eliza touched the wooden frame gently. "It's perfect." They ate supper by the fire that night. Just beans, cornbread, and black coffee. The silence between them was not uncomfortable, but it carried weight, 2 strangers learning the edges of each other's presence. At last, Eliza spoke. "You want to know how I ended up on that platform?" Silas looked up. "Only if you want to tell it." For a moment she stared into the flames. "My father died when I was 12, she said slowly. "Lung fever." Silas remained quiet. "My mother married again the next year, a man named Jasper Holloway." Her voice hardened. "He owned land, money. Everyone said we were lucky." Silas knew that tone. People only spoke like that when luck had turned into something darker. "He believed daughters belonged to the men who raised them," she continued. Silas felt the air in the cabin grow colder. "And when I grew tall, stronger than he expected," her hands tightened around her coffee cup, "he decided discipline was necessary." Silas did not interrupt. The fire cracked softly. "I fought back," Eliza said. "Always." Her eyes lifted toward him. That made him angry. She touched the scar on her cheek. "He aimed a riding crop at my eye." Silas leaned back slowly. "Your mother? Dead within a year of marrying him." The words fell heavy in the quiet cabin. Eliza's voice dropped lower. "But the worst part wasn't what he did to me." Silas already knew the answer. "There was another child," he said quietly. Eliza nodded once. "My sister." Her jaw tightened, and when he started looking at her the same way, the fire popped loudly. Eliza's eyes hardened like steel. "That's when I decided someone was leaving that house alive, and someone else might not." Eliza stood slowly from the table. For a moment she paced the small cabin like a restless wolf, the firelight throwing long shadows across the log walls. Silas said nothing. Some stories needed room to breathe. "I waited until he was drunk," she said finally. Her voice had gone quiet and steady. "There was a poker beside the fireplace." She stared into the flames as if seeing that night again. "I picked it up." Silas watched her carefully. "I could have killed him," she admitted. The words hung in the air. He was on the floor, bleeding, helpless. Her hands trembled slightly. "And I wanted to." Silas understood that feeling. Every man who had survived violence did. "But my sister was standing there," Eliza continued softly, "watching." The trembling in her hands stopped, and I thought, if I killed him, what would she learn? Silas nodded slowly. "So I didn't." "You just hurt him enough he couldn't follow," Silas guessed. Eliza glanced at him. "Yes." She leaned against the window frame. "We ran that same night." The wind outside whispered through the trees. "We made it to Kansas City," she continued. "No money, no family, just 2 girls trying to survive." Silas poured more coffee into her cup without asking. "Your sister how old?" he asked. 5 years younger than me. Small thing, gentle." Her voice softened slightly. "I raised her after Mama died." Silas could hear the pride hidden inside those words. "She was easy to place," Eliza continued bitterly. "Pretty girls always are. A shopkeeper in California wanted a wife." "And you?" She laughed once. Short and sharp. "No man wanted the giant." Silas didn't answer. "The marriage agency kept me months," she said. "Tried to find someone desperate enough. And when they couldn't, they decided to auction me." The fire crackled again. Silas leaned forward slightly. "Your sister made it to California?" Eliza hesitated. "I don't know." That admission hurt her more than the rest of the story. The agency said they sent her to Sacramento. A man named Daniel Finch. Her eyes dropped to the table. "But I never heard from her again." Silas sat quietly for a long moment. Then he spoke. "I go down to town every few months." Eliza looked up. "There's a telegraph office." Hope flickered across her face before she could hide it. You do that? Family matters? Silas said simply. Silence settled between them again. But it was different now. Warmer. After a moment, Eliza studied him across the fire. You had family once. Silas nodded slowly. A wife, Sarah, and a boy. What happened? Cholera, he said quietly. 1851. He stared into the flames. Came back from hunting and found them buried. Eliza did not offer pity. She understood better than most. You've been alone ever since? 22 years. The wind outside carried the distant howl of a wolf. Eliza looked around the quiet cabin. Then back at him. You don't seem like a man who was meant to stay alone forever. Silas didn't answer. But for the first time in a very long time, he wondered if she might be right. The first snowstorm of winter arrived 3 nights later. Silas smelled it before it came. Cold wind pushed down from the higher peaks, carrying the sharp scent of ice and heavy clouds. Storm coming, he said that evening while repairing a trap beside the fire. Eliza was sewing a tear in one of his flannel shirts. How bad? She asked. Silas listened to the wind scratching the roof. First real blizzard of the season, he said, could last days. Her hands paused on the needle. Days, sometimes a week. Silas looked up. You worried about being snowed in? Eliza hesitated. No. But her voice tightened slightly. I've just never been trapped somewhere I actually wanted to stay. That night, the wind began to howl. By morning, snow covered the world so thick they could barely see beyond the barn. The mountains vanished behind a wall of white. The storm raged for 2 days. By the third night, the cabin felt smaller somehow. Not uncomfortable, just close. Silas woke to soft footsteps in the next room. He heard Eliza pacing, back and forth, like a restless animal. He knocked lightly on her door. Can't sleep? The door opened slowly. For the first time since he met her, he saw fear in her eyes. The wind, she said quietly. It sounds like screaming. Silas nodded. Storms do that up here. She wrapped her arms around herself. I keep hearing things. Come sit by the fire, he said. Company helps sometimes. They settled into chairs near the hearth, wrapped in blankets while the fire snapped and cracked. Outside, the storm roared like a living creature. Silas added another log to the flames. Tell me about before, he said after a while. Before your father died. Eliza stared into the fire. We had a small farm in Ohio, she said slowly. Nothing special, but it was ours. A faint smile appeared. Papa taught me to ride, to shoot, said a person should know how to take care of themselves. Smart man. Mama thought he was scandalous teaching a girl those things. Silas chuckled softly. What about your sister? Eliza's voice softened again. Millie was tiny when she was born, sickly at first. She leaned back in the chair. I carried her everywhere. Her eyes grew distant. She used to call me her giant guardian angel. The wind howled harder outside. Silas watched her carefully. You miss her every day. Eliza nodded. She's the only piece of the good world I had left. The fire popped suddenly. After a moment, she spoke again. The worst part of living with Holloway wasn't the beatings. Silas waited. It was the words. Her jaw tightened. He called me a monster, said no man would ever want me except as a curiosity. The flames flickered across her scar. Some nights, she admitted quietly, I believed him. Silas leaned forward slightly. And now? Eliza looked up at him. Firelight reflected in her gray-green eyes. Now I'm starting to think he was just a small man who needed to make others feel smaller. Silas nodded slowly. That's the truth of most cruel men. For a long moment they simply listened to the storm. Then Eliza asked softly, Why aren't you afraid of me? Silas met her eyes across the fire. Because you're not frightening. He paused. You're just a woman who had to become stronger than the world expected. The storm raged outside, but inside the cabin, something quieter began to grow. The storm finally broke the next morning. Sunlight spilled across the mountains, turning the endless snowfields into a sea of glittering light. Eliza stepped outside the cabin and stopped in her tracks. The world had changed overnight. Pine branches sagged beneath thick blankets of snow. The mountains shone like polished silver beneath the rising sun. It's beautiful, she whispered. Silas stepped up beside her, carrying a bucket for the horses. Wait until the sun climbs higher, he said. The peaks will look like diamonds. Eliza laughed softly. In Missouri, snow just meant cold and mud. Silas filled the water trough. Up here it means clean. She watched the valley stretch far below them. Clean, she repeated quietly, like a new start. Silas didn't answer, but he understood what she meant. They spent the day digging paths through deep drifts and clearing the barn doors. The work warmed them despite the bitter air. For the first time since Eliza arrived, their movements felt natural together, not strangers sharing a space. Something closer. That evening they sat by the fire again. Silas was sharpening a hunting knife while Eliza mended a blanket. The silence felt comfortable now. Then suddenly, Duke, the big gray horse in the barn, began to whinny loudly. Silas's head snapped up. "That's not the wind," he muttered. Eliza set the blanket aside. Footsteps crunched faintly outside in the snow. Both of them reached for their guns at the same time. Silas moved toward the door slowly. Through the window he saw a single rider approaching the clearing. A badge glinted on the man's coat. "Lawman," Silas said quietly. Eliza stepped beside him. "If he's come for me, hiding won't help." The rider dismounted and raised his hands. "Evening," he called. "Name's Deputy Marshal Thomas Reed." Silas opened the door, but kept his rifle visible. "What's your business?" Reed stepped into the cabin slowly, brushing snow from his coat. "I'm looking for a woman named Eliza Holloway." Eliza stiffened. "That was never my name," she said firmly. The marshal studied her carefully. "Then Eliza Carter," he corrected. "How do you know that?" she demanded. Reed removed a thick folder from his coat. "Because I've been investigating your case for 2 months." The room went silent. "I'm not here to arrest you," he continued calmly, "but there are things you need to know." Silas poured 3 cups of coffee and set them on the table. Reed opened the folder. "Jasper Holloway has filed charges against you," he said. "Assault, theft, kidnapping your sister." Eliza's face hardened. "She's my sister. Legally, she was his ward," Reed replied. "The law may see it that way." Eliza laughed bitterly. "The same law that let him beat us and lock us in a cellar." Reed sighed. "I'm not here to argue justice." "Then why are you here?" Silas asked. The marshal leaned forward slightly. "Because your sister wrote a letter to the federal marshal's office in California." Eliza froze. "Lily, she's alive," Reed said gently, "and she's been looking for you." Hope flickered across Eliza's face, but the marshal's expression remained serious. "She's safe," he continued, "but Holloway hasn't stopped searching for you." Silas's grip tightened on his coffee cup. "What do you mean?" Reed met his eyes. "He's hired men." Outside, the wind shifted across the mountains, and inside the cabin, the quiet life they had just begun suddenly felt very fragile. The cabin felt smaller after the marshal's words. Snow tapped softly against the window while the fire crackled in the hearth. For a moment no one spoke. Finally Eliza broke the silence. "He sent men after me." Marshal Reed nodded. "4 that we know of. Bounty hunters. They've been following the same trail I did." Silas leaned back in his chair. "How far behind you?" "Hard to say," Reed replied. "Storm might have slowed them, but men like that don't quit easy." Eliza folded her arms tightly. "So you came to warn us." "I came to offer a solution." Silas raised an eyebrow. Reed slid a paper across the table. "Miss Carter, are you familiar with marriage's legal protection?" Eliza stared at him. "I'm nobody's property." "Not property," Reed said calmly. "Protected." Silas watched quietly. "A married woman falls under her husband's legal guardianship," the marshal explained. "Holloway's claim on you would be void." Eliza scoffed. "And who exactly would marry me?" She gestured toward her size. "You've seen me." Reed glanced slowly at Silas, then back to her. "Seems to me someone already sees your worth." Eliza turned sharply. "No." Her voice was firm. "Silas has done enough already." Silas set down his cup. "Wouldn't be a trap if I offered." Both of them looked at him. "What are you saying?" Eliza asked quietly. Silas shrugged. "Marshall's right. It's practical." He leaned forward slightly. "You'd stay here, safe from Holloway's claims. And when you want to leave," he added, "we could end it quietly." Eliza shook her head. "You'd marry me? Just for protection?" Silas met her eyes. "I've lived alone 22 years. A piece of paper won't change that. The room went silent again. Marshal Reed cleared his throat. There's something else. He pulled another document from the folder. Holloway's hired men don't care if you come back alive. Eliza didn't flinch. He wants me dead. Silenced, Reed corrected. Silas's voice turned colder. How long before they arrive? Days, Reed said. Maybe sooner. Eliza stood slowly and walked to the window. Snow glittered across the mountains outside. She stared at it for a long time. Then she turned back. My father used to say the bravest thing a person can do, her voice softened, is accept help when they need it. She looked directly at Silas. You'd really do this? Silas nodded once. Yes, not hesitation, not pity, just a simple answer. Eliza took a slow breath, then she faced the marshal. All right, she said. I'll marry him. Reed removed a folded certificate from his coat. Good thing I came prepared. The ceremony was simple, just words spoken over the same rough table where they had shared coffee. Snow drifted quietly outside the cabin. Eliza Carter, the marshal said, do you willingly take Silas Boone as your husband? She glanced at Silas, then nodded. I do. Silas Boone, do you take this woman as your lawful wife? Silas didn't hesitate. I do. The marshal signed the paper and slid it toward them. Well, he said, congratulations. Eliza stared down at the certificate. Mrs. Boone. The name looked strange, but not unwelcome. Outside, the wind stirred the snow again. And somewhere in the mountains, 4 armed men were riding toward the cabin. They heard the horses before they saw them. Duke and Bishop began snorting in the barn, stamping their hooves against the frozen ground. Silas was on his feet instantly. Eliza. She was already reaching for the shotgun he had taught her to use. Through the frost-covered window they saw 4 riders moving between the trees. Dark shapes against the white snow. They found us, Eliza whispered. Silas blew out the lamp and motioned for her to move back from the window. Stay low. The riders stopped at the edge of the clearing. One of them laughed. Smoke from the chimney, a voice called. They're home. Another voice answered. Remember, the woman's worth the same dead or alive. Eliza's grip tightened on the shotgun. Silas leaned close and whispered, just like we practiced. The riders split into 2 groups. 2 circled toward the barn. 2 walked straight toward the cabin. The first man kicked the door. It held. Open up, he shouted. Federal marshals, Silas called back calmly. Real marshals don't sneak around in the dark. The man cursed. Old man, this isn't your fight. Send the woman out and you live. Silas raised his rifle. Can't send out what I don't have. Glass shattered in the back room. One of them was climbing through Eliza's window. The shotgun roared. A scream followed. Eliza had been waiting. The front door burst inward. A second later, Silas fired. The first attacker dropped into the snow. Gunfire exploded around the cabin. Bullets slammed into the logs while splinters flew through the room. The barn, Eliza shouted. They're going for the horses. Silas didn't hesitate. Cover me. He burst into the storm of gunfire, sprinting through the snow toward the barn. Eliza fired again from the doorway, forcing the remaining man to duck. Inside the barn, Duke was rearing wildly. A bounty hunter struggled with a horse's halter. Silas fired. The man spun and fell into the hay. Another attacker lunged from behind a stack of feed sacks. They crashed together, grappling in the straw. The younger man was strong, but Silas had spent 60 years surviving. He drove his thumb into the man's eye and slammed his knee into the hunter's ribs. The man collapsed. Silas grabbed a shovel and ended the fight. Outside, the gunfire stopped. Suddenly, the clearing fell silent. Too silent. Fear hit Silas like a fist. Eliza. He ran back toward the cabin. The last bounty hunter stood in the snow holding her in front of him. His arm wrapped around her throat. A pistol pressed against her temple. Drop the rifle, the man shouted. Silas froze. Or she dies. Eliza's eyes met his. They were steady, calm. Then her lips moved silently. Now, she suddenly went limp. Her full weight dropped against the man. The sudden shift threw his aim off for a single second. That was all Silas needed. The rifle cracked. The bounty hunter fell backward into the snow. Eliza scrambled free, breathing hard. Silas reached her quickly. You hurt? She shook her head. I killed one. Silas placed a steady hand on her shoulder. You did what you had to. Snow began falling again, covering the blood in quiet white. 4 men had come to claim a bounty. None of them would leave the mountain, and, as Eliza stood beside her new husband in the silent clearing, she realized something powerful. She was no longer running. The snow kept falling through the night. Silas and Eliza dragged the bodies away from the cabin and covered them with old canvas sheets. Neither of them spoke much while they worked. The mountains were quiet again, but the quiet felt different now. Heavier. Inside the cabin, Eliza sat by the fire wrapped in a blanket. Her hands still trembled slightly. Silas poured 2 small cups of whiskey and handed one to her. She drank it in one swallow. "Will more come?" she asked quietly. Silas sat across from her. "Maybe." He stared into the flames. "The word will spread. 4 men came up this mountain, didn't come back. That might scare others away. Or bring more." Eliza nodded slowly. "We could leave," she said after a moment. "Go west. Find Lily in California." Silas looked up at her. "Is that what you want?" She thought about it carefully. Then she shook her head. "No." Her voice was stronger now. "This place, it's the first real home I've had since my father died." She glanced around the cabin. "I won't let Holloway take another home from me." Silas studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Good." She looked at him curiously. "Why good?" "Because I wasn't planning on leaving either." A faint smile touched her face. For the first time since the fight began, after a moment she looked down at the marriage certificate still lying on the table. "Silas, yes, the marriage?" He leaned back slightly. "What about it? It was supposed to be protection. It still is. But is that all it is to you?" The question hung between them. Silas could have answered quickly, kept things simple, but he didn't. "No," he said quietly. Eliza looked up. "No?" she repeated. He shook his head slowly. "When that man had his gun on you," Silas paused. "I realized something." "What?" "I realized I had something worth losing again." The words seemed to surprise even him. Eliza reached across the table and took his rough hand in hers. Her grip was strong, warm. "We're quite a pair," she said softly. "The giant woman everyone fears and the mountain hermit everyone avoids." Silas squeezed her hand. "We're survivors." She nodded. "And partners." "Partners," he agreed. They sat there quietly for a long time. Snow falling softly outside. Firelight flickering across the cabin walls. At last Eliza spoke again. "We should send word to Lily." Silas nodded. "I'll ride to town in a few days." She looked down at the marriage paper again. "People will expect things now." Silas followed her gaze. "Our business is our own," he said. Eliza studied him carefully. Then she smiled faintly. "I'm glad it was you." Silas raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "If I had to marry someone to survive." She squeezed his hand gently. "I'm glad it was you." Before he could answer, Duke whinnied loudly in the barn. Both of them turned toward the door. Silas slowly stood. "More riders?" Eliza picked up the shotgun again, but when they looked out into the snowy clearing, only moonlight and drifting snow greeted them. For now, the mountain was still theirs. 2 weeks passed after the fight. Winter settled deeper into the mountains, covering the valley in endless white. Life at the cabin slowly returned to a rhythm. Silas checked traps. Eliza chopped wood and kept the fire burning. And each night, they sat by the hearth talking quietly, learning the small details of each other's lives. The distance between them had changed. Not gone completely, but changed. One afternoon, a rider appeared on the narrow trail, climbing toward the cabin. Silas saw him first. "Marshal Reed," he muttered. Eliza stepped outside beside him as the lawman dismounted, but Reed's expression was not the calm one they remembered. It was grim. "I'm sorry to bring trouble again," he said. He handed Eliza a folded telegram. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The message was short. "Bring your sister Margaret home or she pays your debt. You have 1 month. Jasper Holloway." Eliza's legs nearly gave out. Silas caught her before she fell. "Margaret?" he asked quietly. "My youngest sister," Eliza whispered. "She was only 8 when I ran." Reed nodded. "Holloway found her." The room felt suddenly colder than the winter outside. "He's using her to force you back," Reed continued. He can't claim you legally anymore, but he can still hurt someone you love. Eliza's face went pale. He'll destroy her, she said softly. Silas's voice hardened. Then we go get her. Reed raised a hand. It's a trap. I know. You'll be walking straight into his reach. Silas met the marshal's eyes calmly. Then we won't go alone. 3 days later, they rode back into Bitter Creek. But they did not ride alone. Behind Silas and Eliza rode 12 other men. Old mountain hunters. Former soldiers. A Cheyenne scout named White Hawk who had once saved Silas's life. Men who understood that sometimes justice did not come from a courthouse. They camped outside town and sent word to Holloway. The message was simple. Midnight, Miller's abandoned barn. Bring the girl. Come alone. Holloway came. But he did not come alone. 6 armed men stepped from the shadows behind him. Margaret stood beside him. She was small, pale, and frightened. A dark bruise marked her eye. Eliza's breath caught. Let her go, she said quietly. Holloway smiled coldly. You humiliated me, he said. You think I'd forget? He gestured toward Margaret. This is compensation. Silas stepped forward. Your men are outnumbered. Holloway laughed. Are they? More figures appeared in the darkness. 20 armed men surrounded the barn. But before Holloway could celebrate, another voice echoed through the shadows. Federal Marshal. Reed stepped forward holding his badge high. Behind him stood 25 rifles. The hunters. The soldiers. The mountain men. Every gun pointed straight at Holloway's group. The man's smile faded. Reed's voice was calm. You're under arrest for kidnapping, extortion, and conspiracy to commit murder. Holloway's face went pale. For the first time in years, the man who had terrified Eliza finally looked afraid. The barn fell silent. Snow drifted slowly through the broken boards while dozens of rifles remained aimed at Holloway and his men. For the first time in his life, the man who had ruled others through fear had nowhere to run. Marshal Reed stepped forward. Mr. Tewing, Holloway, he said calmly, you're finished. Holloway glanced around at the ring of armed men. These were not the weak townspeople he used to control. These were frontier men, men who lived by simpler rules. His shoulders sagged slightly. What do you want? He muttered. Silas answered. You signed papers releasing Margaret from your guardianship. Holloway sneered. And if I refuse? Reed spoke again. Then I arrest you right here. Kidnapping a minor, extortion across state lines, and hiring killers. He lifted the telegram. This is enough to bury you. The color drained from Holloway's face. Slowly, bitterly, he signed the documents Reed placed in front of him. When the last signature was finished, Reed took Margaret gently by the hand and guided her toward Eliza. The girl ran the final steps. Tally, she cried, using the childhood nickname. Eliza dropped to her knees and wrapped her sister in a fierce embrace. I've got you, she whispered. You're safe now. Margaret clung to her, crying against her shoulder. Silas watched them quietly. For the first time since the girl had arrived, her small hands relaxed. Holloway turned and left the barn without another word. His men followed quickly behind him. They knew defeat when they saw it. The gathered mountain men slowly dispersed into the night. Reed tipped his hat. Looks like this family finally has its freedom. Eliza squeezed Silas's hand. Family, she repeated softly. The ride home felt different. Margaret slept between them in the wagon, wrapped in blankets while the dawn slowly painted the mountains gold. After a long silence, Eliza spoke. You called her family. Silas glanced at her. She is. And me? Silas smiled faintly. You're my wife. Eliza studied his face carefully. We said the marriage was only for protection. Silas nodded. Plans change. She leaned closer. I'd like that. He chuckled quietly. Good. Because I'm too old to sleep alone when I've got a beautiful wife sitting beside me. Eliza touched the scar on her cheek. Beautiful? Especially the scars. She leaned across Margaret's sleeping form and kissed him. It was slow, gentle, but certain. Their first real kiss. Margaret opened one eye and smiled sleepily. Does this mean we're a real family now? Silas and Eliza answered together. Yes. Margaret closed her eyes again. Good, she murmured. I'm tired of being alone. Silas wrapped an arm around both sisters as the wagon rolled toward the mountain cabin. No one's alone anymore, he promised. Above them, the Wyoming peaks stood tall and silent. And in that quiet wilderness, two wounded souls had built something stronger than loneliness. A home, a family, and a love that began the moment one man chose kindness in a cruel crowd. If this tale stirred your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Tales from the Frontier, where history rides the frontier, courage is tested, and love refuses to die. Until the next tale, ride on, partner.